Right now, something unusual is unfolding above our world. No explosions in the sky, no dramatic eclipses, no bright supermoon dominating the night. Instead, something quieter is happening. But sometimes the quietest events in the universe carry the deepest impact. High above Earth, two ancient wanderers of the sky are slowly moving toward each other, Venus and Saturn. To most people, this will look like nothing more than two distant lights in the darkness. Small, harmless, easy to ignore. But to those who study cosmic patterns, this alignment has always carried a deeper meaning. Because when Venus and Saturn meet in the sky, something unusual tends to happen down here on Earth, not in the oceans or the weather, but inside the human mind. Throughout history, astrologers and sky watchers noticed a strange pattern. During these rare conjunctions, people often experience sudden shifts in perspective. Relationships reach turning points. Life paths change direction. Decisions that once felt impossible suddenly become unavoidable. It's almost as if something inside us wakes up. Ancient traditions described these moments as cosmic triggers, windows of time where hidden lessons rise to the surface, not because the planets control our lives, but because certain moments in time seem to reveal truths we were previously avoiding. And that's what makes this particular alignment so fascinating, because events like this don't affect everyone the same way. For most people, these days will pass like any other. Normal routines, normal thoughts, nothing unusual. But a small group of people may feel something different. A quiet but undeniable shift inside their awareness. A strange pressure to rethink their life. Old habits suddenly feeling meaningless. Situations they tolerated for years suddenly becoming impossible to ignore. It may feel like clarity arriving out of nowhere, like a hidden switch has quietly been turned on. And once that switch flips, things rarely go back to the way they were before. That's the strange power of cosmic timing. It doesn't shout, it doesn't force. It simply creates moments where the truth becomes harder to ignore. And if you happen to click on this video, if something about this message pulled your attention, there's a real possibility that this cosmic moment is touching your life in ways you're only beginning to notice. To truly understand why this alignment feels so powerful, we first have to understand what Venus and Saturn actually represent in the language of the cosmos. For thousands of years, astrologers believed that planets symbolize different forces inside human life. Not because the planets control us like puppets, but because they mirror patterns that exist within human psychology and experience. Each planet carries a certain type of energy, a certain lesson, a certain theme. And when two of these planetary forces meet in the sky, their meanings begin to interact, sometimes gently, and sometimes in ways that completely shift the direction of our lives. Venus is one of the most influential of these forces. In astrology, Venus represents attraction. But attraction is much deeper than simple romance. Venus represents everything that pulls your heart towards something. Love, beauty, pleasure, desire, connection. It governs the things we value and the things we want to keep close to us. Venus shapes the relationships we form, the aesthetics we enjoy, and even the way we measure happiness. It asks questions like, what do you love? What do you value? What kind of life actually makes you feel alive? Venus is the part of human nature that seeks joy and harmony. It wants relationships that feel effortless. It wants beauty. It wants comfort. It wants meaning. But Saturn is very different. If Venus represents desire, Saturn represents reality. Saturn is often called the planet of discipline, structure, and time. It is associated with responsibility, consequences, and the long-term effects of our choices. Saturn doesn't operate in the world of dreams. It operates in the world of truth. It asks a very different set of questions. Are your choices sustainable? Are your relationships built on something real? Are your goals strong enough to survive time? Saturn has no interest in illusions. If something is weak, Saturn exposes it. If something is strong, Saturn strengthens it. That's why many astrologers refer to Saturn as the great teacher of the zodiac, because Saturn lessons are rarely easy, but they are always meaningful. Saturn is the force that pushes people to grow up, to become responsible, to stop living in fantasy and start building something real. And when Venus, the planet of desire, meets Saturn, the planet of reality, something extremely important happens. Your heart meets the truth. Your desires meet the test of time. The things you want are suddenly placed under a microscope. This is why Venus-Saturn conjunctions are often described as destiny triggers, because they force alignment between what you want and what is actually possible. If something in your life is built on a solid foundation, this alignment can strengthen it. Relationships that are based on respect and honesty often become deeper during this time. People suddenly recognize the true value of someone in their life. Commitments become stronger. Decisions become clearer. But if something in your life is built on illusion, the effect can feel very different. Relationships based on convenience may suddenly feel heavy. Connections that once felt exciting may start revealing hidden cracks. Goals that once looked glamorous may begin to feel empty. It can feel confusing at first, because Venus wants comfort, but Saturn demands truth. Imagine someone who has been chasing a dream that doesn't actually match their deeper purpose. For years, they may have ignored small signs that something was wrong. Maybe the work feels exhausting. Maybe the reward never feels satisfying. Maybe success never feels as meaningful as they expected. Under normal circumstances, it's easy to ignore those signals. Life gets busy. Distractions appear. And people continue down paths that don't truly fulfill them. But when Venus and Saturn align, the emotional fog begins to clear. Suddenly, people begin to see things differently. They notice patterns they once ignored. They recognize emotional imbalances. They see where they have been investing energy into things that cannot grow. It's not always comfortable. In fact, many people describe Venus-Saturn alignments as emotionally intense, because clarity can feel heavy, but that heaviness is actually a signal of transformation. Saturn energy is slow, patient, and powerful. It doesn't rush. Instead, it builds pressure until a moment of realization finally arrives. And when that realization appears, people often experience a deep internal shift. They stop chasing temporary excitement. They begin focusing on things that actually matter. Long-term goals, meaningful connections, personal responsibility. And this is where the idea of the karmic checkpoint comes into play. A karmic checkpoint is not about punishment or reward. It's about evaluation. A moment where life pauses and asks a simple but powerful question. Is the direction you're moving in truly aligned with who you are becoming? If the answer is yes, Saturn strengthens that path. But if the answer is no, Saturn begins to create pressure, not to harm you, but to guide you towards something more authentic. And that's why this conjunction can feel so important for certain people. Because when Venus and Saturn meet, the universe symbolically brings together two of the most powerful forces in human life: desire and reality, heart and structure, dreams and time. It's the moment where your heart asks what it wants, and Saturn asks whether you are ready to build it. For some people, this moment brings confirmation. For others, it brings redirection. But either way, it creates a rare opportunity for honesty. And honesty, although sometimes uncomfortable, is often the first step toward destiny. If this cosmic shift is affecting you, there's a good chance you've already felt something unusual over the past few days. Not something dramatic, not something obvious, but something subtle, almost psychological. A quiet shift inside your thoughts, a strange feeling that something in your life needs attention. The signs of a Venus-Saturn alignment are rarely loud. Instead, they appear as small internal signals, changes in perspective that seem to arrive without warning. One of the most common signs is a sudden desire to clean your life, and not just your room or your workspace, your entire environment. People suddenly feel the urge to simplify things, to remove distractions, to organize their priorities, to step back and ask themselves an uncomfortable question. What am I doing with my life right now? This isn't random motivation. It's Saturn energy at work. Saturn has a very specific psychological effect. It brings awareness to structure. It makes people examine the foundations of their life, their habits, their responsibilities, their long-term direction. Under Saturn's influence, it becomes difficult to ignore things that once felt tolerable. Situations that once seemed normal may suddenly feel exhausting. You may notice that you have less patience for meaningless conversations, less tolerance for drama, less interest in activities that once distracted you. Things that once filled your time may suddenly feel empty, and this can feel strange at first, because nothing external may have changed. But internally, your perspective has shifted, and that shift creates a powerful effect. You start noticing patterns that were always there. Perhaps you realize a relationship is no longer growing. Maybe a job that once felt exciting now feels limiting. Maybe certain habits suddenly appear destructive instead of comforting. This is one of Saturn's greatest psychological powers. It removes the emotional fog that allows people to stay stuck. But Venus adds another dimension to this process. While Saturn forces reflection, Venus awakens the heart. This means the shift you're feeling is not only about what's wrong, it's also about what might be possible. Many people during this alignment feel an unexpected pull toward something meaningful, a creative project they once ignored, an idea they once dismissed, a direction they were once too afraid to explore. Suddenly, that idea doesn't seem unrealistic anymore. Instead, it begins to feel important, almost urgent. You may find yourself thinking about things that truly excite you. Not superficial excitement, but deeper inspiration. The kind that makes you imagine a different version of your future. For some people, this could be related to creativity, writing, music, art. For others, it could involve life decisions, changing careers, moving somewhere new, rebuilding a relationship, or finally letting go of one that has quietly drained their energy. These realizations often arrive alongside a strange emotional heaviness. But this heaviness isn't sadness. It's something deeper. It feels like seriousness. Like your mind is stepping out of autopilot and beginning to examine your life more honestly. Many people describe it as feeling mentally older for a moment, more aware, more reflective. You begin to notice the passage of time. You think about the choices you've made and the choices you haven't made yet. This is classic Saturn influence. Saturn is connected to time, and when its energy becomes active, people become more aware of how precious time actually is. But perhaps the most powerful sign of this alignment is the resurfacing of old emotional patterns. Memories may appear suddenly. Old conversations replay in your mind. Past relationships or unfinished situations may return to your thoughts. You might remember moments where you ignored your intuition, moments where you settled for less than you deserved, moments where you avoided difficult decisions. At first, these memories can feel uncomfortable, but they serve a purpose. Because the mind is not bringing them back to punish you. It's bringing them back to complete something, to learn something, to understand something that was not clear at the time. Psychologists often refer to this as emotional integration, the process where the brain revisits old experiences in order to extract meaning from them. And Saturn is strongly associated with this kind of psychological growth. It doesn't allow unfinished lessons to remain buried forever. It brings them back to the surface so they can finally be understood. But when Venus is involved in this process, the lessons often revolve around three key themes: love, self-worth, and purpose. You may begin to realize where you once undervalued yourself, where you gave too much energy to people who didn't appreciate it, where you ignored your own needs in order to keep peace in a relationship. Or you may recognize the opposite pattern, moments where you held back your emotions, where fear prevented you from expressing love or honesty. These realizations can feel intense, but they are incredibly valuable, because awareness creates choice, and choice creates change. That's why Saturn only creates pressure where growth is required. If a part of your life is already aligned with your deeper values, Saturn leaves it alone. But if something is out of alignment, Saturn slowly increases the pressure until you finally notice it. And when Venus participates in that process, the lessons often become deeply personal. They ask questions like, what kind of love do you truly deserve? What kind of life actually reflects your values? What kind of future would make you proud of the person you're becoming? These questions may not have immediate answers, but the fact that they are appearing in your mind is already significant, because it means something inside you is waking up. Something is beginning to evaluate your life from a higher perspective, and that perspective can quietly transform the decisions you make next. Which is why many people later look back on Venus-Saturn alignments as turning points. Moments where nothing dramatic seemed to happen on the outside, but everything began to change on the inside. Here's the strange truth about cosmic events. They don't affect everyone in the same way. Even when the entire planet is under the same sky, people experience these moments very differently. Think about a thunderstorm at night. Some people sleep straight through it. They never hear the thunder. They never notice the lightning. But others wake up instantly. Their senses respond immediately to the shift in the atmosphere. Cosmic cycles work in a very similar way. The alignment of planets doesn't suddenly force everyone to feel the same emotions or make the same decisions. Instead, it tends to amplify what is already happening inside a person's life. If someone is deeply distracted, emotionally numb, or completely focused on routine survival, they may not notice anything at all. Life simply continues as usual. The days pass, the routines repeat, nothing appears different. But for people who are already in a period of reflection, the effect can feel very real. Certain individuals are naturally more sensitive to shifts in their environment. People who think deeply, people who question their purpose, people who often reflect on their choices and direction. These individuals tend to feel cosmic timing more strongly, not because they are mystical or supernatural, but because their awareness is already active. When the mind is open and reflective, it becomes easier to notice subtle changes in perspective. And that's exactly the kind of psychological shift planetary alignments tend to trigger. Many of the people who notice these moments are already standing at a crossroads in their life. They may be going through a transition, a relationship change, a career decision, a personal transformation, or even a quiet internal realization that the life they are living no longer feels aligned with who they are becoming. When someone is already standing at that kind of threshold, even a small moment of clarity can feel incredibly powerful. It can feel like confirmation, like the final push needed to make a decision that has been slowly building for months, or even years. Ancient astrologers observed this pattern long before modern psychology existed. They believed certain planetary alignments created what they called activation windows, periods of time where hidden potential suddenly becomes visible, not because the planets magically create destiny, but because these moments act like mirrors. They reflect the deeper patterns that already exist inside a person's life. Think of it like sunlight entering a dark room. The room was always there. The objects were always there. But without light, they remained invisible. When the light appears, suddenly, everything becomes clear. Cosmic alignments can act in a similar way. They illuminate parts of our lives that were previously hidden behind distraction, fear, or uncertainty. During these windows, people often see things differently. A situation they tolerated for years suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. A dream they once considered unrealistic suddenly feels achievable. A truth they once avoided becomes undeniable. This is why these moments often feel so important, because they don't just reveal problems, they also reveal potential. You may suddenly recognize abilities you never fully trusted. Ideas that once seemed too risky may start to feel necessary. Paths that once felt closed may appear open again. But there is something important to understand about activation windows. They don't last forever. Timing is a crucial part of growth. Just like seasons in nature, certain periods are better for planting seeds, while others are meant for harvesting results. When a moment of clarity appears, it creates an opportunity. But opportunities always come with responsibility. This is where Saturn's influence becomes especially important. Saturn is often described as the planet of discipline and responsibility. It rewards effort. It rewards maturity. It rewards decisions that are made with awareness and commitment. But Saturn has very little patience for hesitation. If you recognize that something in your life needs to change, Saturn encourages you to act on that realization, not impulsively, not recklessly, but with honesty and responsibility. The people who respond to these moments often experience powerful transformations. They begin building something new, a healthier relationship, a meaningful project, a more authentic life direction. And over time, those choices create long-term stability. But ignoring these signals can have the opposite effect. When people recognize the truth about their situation, but refuse to act on it, the internal pressure tends to grow stronger. The dissatisfaction increases. The frustration builds. The feeling of being stuck becomes harder to ignore. This isn't punishment. It's simply the psychological effect of living out of alignment with your deeper values. The mind knows something needs to change, but the person continues pretending everything is fine. Eventually, that tension becomes impossible to maintain, which is why many people later realize that the moments they once resisted were actually the moments that could have changed everything. And that brings us back to the central idea of this cosmic alignment. The Venus-Saturn conjunction is not about predicting a specific event. It's about creating a moment of awareness, a moment where people who are ready for change suddenly see their life more clearly. Most people will ignore this shift completely. Their routines will continue, their habits will remain the same. But for those who are already searching for direction, for those who have been quietly questioning their path, this moment can feel like a turning point, not because the universe forces them to change, but because they finally recognize the truth about where they are and where they want to go next. And sometimes that realization is the first step toward a completely different future. Now we arrive at the deeper idea behind this cosmic moment, the idea of a destiny code. Not in a mystical sense where the universe is controlling every move you make, but in a much more subtle and powerful way. Life moves through cycles, just like the seasons change, just like the tides rise and fall. Human life also moves through periods of growth, reflection, pressure, and transformation. Certain moments in time feel ordinary, but other moments feel different, almost like something invisible has shifted. These are the moments when clarity suddenly appears, when questions you've been avoiding finally demand answers. And the Venus-Saturn conjunction is one of those rare windows, because when these two planetary forces align, they bring together two powerful ideas. Saturn represents what lasts: structure, responsibility, commitment, the things that survive the test of time. Venus represents something equally powerful, what the heart truly values: love, meaning, connection, purpose. So when Venus and Saturn meet in the sky, they symbolically ask one of the most important questions a person can face. What in your life is actually worth building? Not what looks impressive, not what temporarily excites you, but what truly matters in the long run. Because Saturn is not interested in temporary success. Saturn builds foundations, and Venus decides what those foundations should be built for. Together, they push people towards something deeper, a real relationship instead of shallow connection, a real purpose instead of empty ambition, a real direction instead of endless distraction. But this alignment also has another effect. It removes illusions. Things that once felt stable may suddenly reveal cracks. Plans may shift. Connections may change. Certain paths may quietly close. But this isn't destruction. It's refinement. Saturn doesn't remove things without reason. It clears space for what can actually survive time. So if life feels slightly different right now, if you feel a strange mix of pressure and clarity, that may not be coincidence. It may simply be a moment where the sky reminds you that your story is still unfolding. And sometimes, the most powerful changes in life don't arrive with chaos. They begin with a quiet realization, a simple thought, a sudden clarity, the moment you understand that something in your life is ready to change.